All right, well, we are continuing with our series that we're doing for this month. We're covering Unity Basics, and that's in honor of our co-founders Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, who were both born during the month of August. Last week we started with our 5 basic principles, which were first put together just 20 years ago, really, by Connie Fillmore, who was the great-granddaughter of the Fillmores. And just by way of review, here's the 5 principles as they were originally written. And we talked about the first one. We'll get into the second one today. The first principle: God is absolute good, everywhere present. Number 2, human beings have a spark of divinity within them, the Christ Spirit within. Their very essence is of God, and therefore they are inherently good. So I'm not going to read through the rest of them here this morning. We're just going to work with the first 2 today, and you've got all 5 of them in your bulletin and an insert, so you can take those home and look at them later if you'd like to. The thing to keep in mind is that those are principles. They're not a creed. They're not a statement of faith. They're not meant to be treated as dogma. We get to work with them. We get to question them and, if necessary, make some changes, which is exactly what we did here at Unity of Auburn, along with many, many other Unity centers out there. Everybody seems to tweak these a little bit, and that's okay, because language that worked well 20 years ago might not mean the same thing in the same context of what we now know today. 20 years doesn't seem that long, but think of all the change that's happened just in the last 10 years. It's amazing. So, the first principle: God is absolute good, everywhere present. Short and sweet. God is absolute good, everywhere present. And I mentioned last week, at one time it was probably necessary and even desirable to say something like that, because traditional religion described God as a ruthless tyrant, a vengeful, wrathful deity who would condemn you to everlasting torture if you didn't follow the rules. Anybody ever get that message growing up? Big time. Now, on top of all of that, a lot of people used to believe in a dude called Satan. And for people with an active imagination, you come up with a picture like this. That's Jesus arm wrestling with Satan, right? People would personify this character. So by calling God absolute good, as they did 20 years ago, absolute good everywhere present, they were sending a message, loud and clear, a message. No heaven, no hell, no hateful, vengeful God, no Satan. Now, those were radical ideas at one time. They're not so radical now. Less than 50% of all Americans still believe in a literal, personal entity named Satan. Mission accomplished, right? The problem I always had with the way that first principle is worded, saying that God is absolute good everywhere present, it suggests to me that everything that happens is good. That I somehow have to twist myself into a pretzel so I can declare that everything and anything that happens is somehow good. Good is a human concept. We use the word good and we define it according to the way that we feel about something. If we like it, if it feels good and causes no harm, we call it good. Or we use the word to describe desirable human behavior, ethical behavior. It all refers and reflects back to us, how we view the world and our relationships. But the question I left us with last week is this: are we justified in imposing that definition on the entire universe? Is the universe good according to human standards? Is reality good according to human standards? Or do we need to stop trying to force the universe and reality to conform to our human needs and desires? Here's a word that describes exactly what I'm talking about. Anthropocentric. Anthropocentric. Regarding humans as the central element of the universe, right? Isn't that what's going on? Or interpreting reality exclusively in terms of human values and experience. I'm not making this up. I mean, this is a real phenomenon that people talk about. Everything revolves around us. At one time, this kind of thinking was very, very common, and it was fairly common still in the days of the Fillmores. But gosh, a lot of things have changed since then. We've learned a lot since then about our role in this vast universe. We're just starting to learn about the size of this universe. Human beings, we are certainly integral parts of the universe, but we're learning that the universe actually can do quite well without us. If the Earth were to disappear tomorrow, the universe would roll along just as it always has, and chances are, I think, very good that there are other conscious life forms emerging somewhere else in this universe made of billions of galaxies like our very own. Consider this, if our sun were to go supernova tomorrow, hard to call that good. Pretty darn hard to call that good, because the Earth would be obliterated, and yet that's the way the universe has operated since the moment of the Big Bang 14 billion years ago. The building blocks of life are forged in stars. They blow up and they blast those things out into space where they create things. They come together and create life, us. It's just the way things work. If we insist that the universe has to operate in a way that conforms to our notions of fairness and justice, all we end up doing is to create more consternation, frustration, and suffering for ourselves. And that was the message of a very, very old book in the Bible called Job. 2,600 years ago, that book was written. Remember what happened to poor old Job? He's the quintessential good guy who has lots of really, really bad things happen to him. You hear the phrase, the patience of Job? Baloney. You read that story, he wasn't patient. He stood up and he shook his fist at the sky and he demanded that God explain why the universe refused to behave the way he, Job, thought it should. Why wasn't the universe just and fair, especially when Job was a good guy? Bad stuff, in a fair and just universe, bad stuff shouldn't happen to good people. Bad stuff shouldn't happen to people who follow the rules the way Job did. And by the end of the story, Job learns a very important lesson. He learns that the universe does not operate according to his human notions of good, evil, justice, or fairness. He learns that he really doesn't know anything about the world or the universe. And that revelation leads to humility and ultimately peace of mind, inner peace. And he also learns something else that's really important that we tend to lose sight of in the story of Job. He learns that even though the universe is vast and powerful, and even though it doesn't operate according to our notions, he learned that he is a part of the universe. He shares in its essential nature, the power, the vastness of it. That's the second principle, incidentally. We're going to get to that shortly. So 2,600 years later, after the story of Job, we surely know a whole lot more than we did back then, but still, we know next to nothing. Ever since the remake of the TV show Cosmos, it aired earlier this year, Neil deGrasse Tyson, he's become a household name. And in one of his essays, there he is, Neil deGrasse Tyson. He wrote a really interesting essay where he said this. He said that everyone we know and love and think about, and everything that we can see and experience around us and through a telescope is around 4% of the universe, which means that 96% of the universe is still unknown to us. The universe doesn't conform to our notions of justice and goodness and fairness. But maybe we've learned how to get along with the universe a little bit better. I call it living in right relationship with reality. And it's an attitude that leads to humility, which is a good thing. So, in order to be a little less anthropocentric, and to maybe put God into more of a central role in the universe, this is the way we word the first principle here at Unity of Auburn. God is the name we give to the source and essence of all that is. There is no other enduring power. Should be a number 1 up there. That was my proofreading mistake. God is the name we give to the source and essence of all that is. There is no other enduring power. So, God is one name among many that we can use. And that's really the same thing that Unity pioneer Emily Cady said back in the 1890s in her book Lessons in Truth. Emily Cady said this. She said, God is the name we give to that unchangeable, inexorable principle at the source of all existence. That was her way of phrasing it. God is not an invisible, superhuman entity who thinks and behaves sort of like we do. That idea just doesn't work for me. And yet, think of it this way, that same inexorable, impersonal principle makes possible everything that we value about being human. It makes possible everything we value about being human. Love, compassion, justice, consciousness itself. Principle is not that far removed from those things. Love, compassion, justice, fairness, consciousness, they're natural extensions of principle which require our active participation in order for them to exist. So this then naturally and logically leads to the second principle, which was originally worded like this. Human beings have a spark of divinity within them, the Christ Spirit within. Their very essence is of God, and therefore they are also inherently good. Well, here's the question I have. If we're inherently good, why do human beings seem to insist on causing so much pain and suffering in the world? Why is that? And once again, we see a choice of words up there 20 years ago that were designed to counteract the prevailing belief in Orthodox Christianity. Part of it was Calvinism, which declared that human beings are utterly depraved. The other part of it is the doctrine of original sin invented by a Bishop Augustine of Hippo back in the 5th century. Original sin, right? Children come into the world, they're not inherently good. They're tainted with the sin of Adam, all that stuff. Well, we can kind of understand maybe where Calvin and Augustine were coming from. Look around us. You can see plenty of evidence that people aren't always good, and we can see plenty of evidence that they're not always evil. So, what is the metaphysical reality? Totally good, totally depraved, somewhere in between, or none of the above? Tough questions, I know. People come up to me after services sometime and say, my head hurts, you make me think. But that's what being a truth student is all about. Charles and Myrtle didn't come here to give us a bunch of platitudes. Metaphysical reality. The metaphysical reality here is that we are all made of the same stuff. Our source, our essence is the same. So, to be direct and plain spoken about it, this is the way we word the second principle here at Unity of Auburn. God, as source and essence of all that is, means that human beings are expressions of God. There you have it. That's who we really are. That's our true nature. God, as source and essence of all that is, makes us co-creators. Using the power of co-creation combined with consciousness, human beings created lots of things, including something very important called the Golden Rule. The Golden Rule is this simple acknowledgement of a very important and I think self-evident truth. We may be separate physical entities, but we share the same essence and we're all in this together. My actions affect you, your actions affect me. Therefore, make sure you do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Gives us a choice. We can create heaven or hell right here on earth. We are free to choose. But are we absolutely free under all circumstances? That is a big question. And I don't mean this to be a digression here, but if it sounds that way, so be it, because I'm thinking about something that happened earlier this week that really shook a lot of people. When we heard about Robin Williams, it was a shock. Here's a guy, he made everyone laugh. He raised millions and millions of dollars for children's hospitals and charities. He did all of this without ever being mean-spirited. Here's a guy who seemed to have everything to live for. But apparently, that was not true for him. His death has everyone talking about depression and suicide, which I guess is a good thing, because as I said earlier, we're all in the same boat. We may not be suffering from depression, but I guarantee you somebody you know is. I was reading a lot of articles and commentaries about Robin Williams, and believe it or not, some of them tried to argue that his death was a moral failing. One guy called it a terrible, monstrous atrocity, a spiritual sickness. No compassion, just this holier-than-thou moral judgment suggesting that Robin Williams could have chosen to do otherwise, except he just wasn't morally or spiritually virtuous enough to choose life. I had some really choice words for that particular blogger, and after I got over that, I had to think about it a little bit more. And I guess when I hear somebody talk like that, it tells me one of two things. Either they've never really known someone who suffered from clinical depression, or if they did, then they never really connected with that person, and they never truly listened. I've been doing spiritual counseling for over 10 years now, and you folks who are therapists and counselors, you can back me up on this. If you connect and truly listen to a person who's in the depths of depression, they are simply not capable of seeing and appreciating life-affirming alternatives. We all know the situation will change. We all know that with the passage of time, things will get better. They don't. They can't see that alternative. We don't have absolute freedom. We have degrees of freedom, and an illness like depression takes away the kind of freedom that the rest of us take for granted. I'd rather be having this conversation with you and still have Robin Williams around to keep making us laugh. But my desires are irrelevant. The universe doesn't work according to my notions of justice and fairness. If we expect fairness and justice and all of those things that human beings value so much, then we have to make it so. We have to make it so. I'm going to conclude this morning with a poem from a musician named Rhiannon Giddens. And she was one of the many people who were posting tributes to Robin Williams this week. And she did it in the form of a poem. And I have no idea about her history, whether she suffered from depression or not, but she wrote this poem, and I just thought it was really beautiful. It's called Thoughts Upon the Death of a Beloved Actor. I darkly go where you can't reach. The depths of viscous shadow, I curl myself and grit my teeth. Of what? It doesn't matter. I only know I have no claim of conscious choice or need. This suffocation has no name, nor patronage, nor creed. It cloaks me in wet company. And when? I never know. In suddenness it comes to me, and then it lets me go. It cares not where the surface lies, nor how bright the sun, nor how close the lover's sighs. It finds me on the run. I yearn to tell you how it is trapped in this horrid dance. But love, what makes me saddest is I'll never get the chance. And then she concludes with a comment that I think is just as important as the poem itself. She says, all we can do in this world is have compassion for those around us and be there when they need us. Just felt like sharing. So that's the way it is. Our first two principles tell us we co-create those things. The love, the caring, the compassion. It's up to us to make it so. And the next two principles tell us how we go about that. And we'll start on that next Sunday. See you then.